The battle for Lysychansk, fought between June 25 and July 3, 2022, marked a pivotal moment in the conflict in eastern Ukraine. On the 3rd of July, Russian forces declared full control over the city, a declaration that signified the fall of the entire Luhansk province. This was a significant territorial gain, the first time the province had been completely under Russian control since the outbreak of hostilities. Yet it was precisely here, at the culmination of this offensive, that the momentum of the advance in Donbas would reach its zenith and begin to wane. The fall of Lysychansk was not merely the end of one chapter. It was a watershed moment that would define the very nature of the war to come. Understanding this battle is to understand not just a victory or a defeat, but the strategic limits that shape the future of the entire front. Following the brutal and protracted struggle for Severodonetsk, the operational landscape of the Luhansk front shifted dramatically. Ukrainian forces, having contested every street and building in the ravaged city, executed a strategic withdrawal across the Seversky Donets River. This retreat left Lysychansk as the final bastion of Ukrainian defense in the province, a solitary stronghold against the advancing tide. But Lysychansk was fundamentally different from its twin city across the river. It stands on commanding high ground, a natural fortress gifted by geography. Its elevated position offered superior defensive terrain, making it far less susceptible to the kind of rapid, overwhelming destruction that had leveled much of Severodonetsk in the early stages of its siege. This tactical reality presented the Russian command with a critical choice. They could press for a swift, final assault to decisively conclude the Luhansk campaign, capitalizing on their recent momentum. Alternatively, they could opt for a more protracted approach, continuing the grinding process of attrition that had defined the battle for Severodonetsk, slowly wearing down the entrenched defenders. The decision they made would not only determine the fate of Lysychansk, but also reveal the ultimate objectives and capabilities of their forces in the wider Donbas theater. The strategic value of Lysychansk was undeniable, and the reasons it posed a more formidable challenge were threefold. First, its dominant high ground provided Ukrainian artillery with fire control over the surrounding lowlands, creating a lethal killing field for any direct ground assault. Second, unlike the increasingly isolated Severodonetsk, Lysychansk was anchored to deeper supply lines stretching south towards the Donetsk province, allowing for more sustained logistical support and reinforcement. Third, it was not an isolated pocket, but part of a deeper defensive line, integrated into a broader network of fortifications. As long as Lysychansk held, Ukraine maintained a crucial bridgehead in the Donbas. Its continued defense denied Russia the ability to declare the complete liberation of Luhansk, a primary political and military objective. However, the city's fate was not to be decided by its intrinsic defensive strengths alone. The true threat lay not within its urban core, but in the deteriorating situation on its periphery. The tactical problem was one of encirclement, not direct assault. Instead of launching a frontal attack on the well-defended city, Russian forces initiated the first phase of the operation by encroaching from the flanks. From the south, units pushed northward from the previously captured town of Popasna. Simultaneously, from the north, forces advanced from the direction of Kremenna and Rubezian. This pincer movement was not designed for a rapid breakthrough, but for a gradual strangulation, methodically creating a semi-encirclement that tightened around Lysychansk with each passing day. Artillery, once again, was the principal instrument of this strategy. The relentless, overwhelming bombardment did not need to capture individual neighborhoods to be effective. Its purpose was to make the city untenable. By systematically destroying supply routes, command posts, defensive positions from a distance, Russian artillery rendered the act of holding the city a slow, unsustainable bleed of manpower and material. In response, the Ukrainian command demonstrated a clear evolution in its operational thinking, consciously avoiding a repeat of the costly urban stalemate that had characterized the fight for Severodonetsk. This second phase of the battle was defined by a calculated defense. The primary objective shifted from holding territory at all costs to a strategy of managed withdrawal. The focus was on slowing the Russian advance, inflicting maximum casualties on the attacking forces, and preserving their own combat power for future engagements. The tactics employed reflected this new doctrine. Ukrainian units defended in dispersed clusters rather than a continuous, rigid line, creating a flexible and resilient defense in depth. They launched short, sharp counterattacks to disrupt enemy formations and buy time, but deliberately refrained from committing to prolonged static engagements. This prioritization of force preservation over territorial control marked a significant departure from the desperate last-stand battles seen in Mariupol and Severodonetsk. It was an acknowledgement that the long-term strategic balance of power was more important than the symbolic value of any single city. The defense of Lysychansk was not about winning. It was about controlling the cost of losing. The flashpoint of the battle arrived when the inexorable Russian advance from the south threatened to sever the last major artery supplying the city. As Russian forces seized control of key points along the vital Lysychansk-Bakhmut highway, the strategic calculus shifted irrevocably. Their artillery could now reach deep into the Ukrainian rear, interdicting supplies and reinforcements with devastating accuracy. At this moment, the operational advantages of holding the high ground of Lysychansk evaporated. The city transformed from a defensive asset into a potential trap. The risk of a full encirclement, which had haunted the defenders of Mariupol and Severodonetsk, grew exponentially with each passing hour. The lessons from those brutal sieges were still fresh, a stark reminder of the fate that awaited forces that held on for too long. With its supply lines compromised and the threat of encirclement imminent, the decision was made. On July 3, 2022, the Ukrainian Military High Command officially announced the withdrawal of its forces from Lysychansk. The retreat was executed in an organized fashion, avoiding a catastrophic collapse of the line. Consequently, Russian forces entered and secured the city with almost no major urban fighting, inheriting a shattered but largely empty prize. For Russia, the capture of Lysychansk marked the territorial completion of its campaign in Luhansk, a significant achievement. However, it failed to translate this tactical success into a strategic breakthrough into the neighboring Donetsk province. The victory was real, but its scope was limited. An assessment of the battle reveals both the peak and the limits of the Russian offensive. In the summer of 2022, for the Russian side, the operation achieved the primary stated objective of the Donbas campaign's first phase. The capture of the entire Luhansk province offered a considerable political and propaganda victory. Yet, this success came at a staggering cost. The attritional warfare had inflicted heavy losses on their most capable units, and the expended forces were in desperate need of rest, reorganization, and reinforcement. In the weeks that followed, the pace of the Russian offensive slowed to a crawl. The momentum gained in May and June completely dissipated. For the Ukrainian side, the loss of Lysychansk meant the loss of the last piece of the Luhansk province, a painful blow to national morale. However, by trading space for time and casualties, they had succeeded in preserving the core of their professional army. These seasoned troops were withdrawn and redeployed, forming the backbone of a new defensive line prepared to contest the cities of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. They had lost a battle, but had saved their army to continue the war. In the final analysis, the battle for Lysychansk was not the starting point of a new Russian advance, but the culmination of an old one. It represented the high-water mark of Russian territorial gains in the Donbas in 2022. More importantly, it signaled a fundamental shift in the character of the war. After Lysychansk, the era of rapid advances and grand encirclement operations came to an end. What followed was a different kind of conflict, a slow, grinding race of attrition. The war devolved into a series of brutal, localized battles for every town and village. A long, arduous contest where each new objective presented a more difficult and costly challenge than the last.